So hi everyone, and welcome to this AQA GCSE Biology Paper 1 exam walkthrough. This session is designed to help you understand what to expect in your exams, how to approach different types of exam questions, and give you some practice to build your confidence heading into the exam season. So in this video, we'll go through some key content, tips, and some strategies for both triple and combined students. So you'll get the chance to pause throughout and try some exam style questions based on some of the elements that we discuss. And hopefully you'll find this really valuable. We've also got the same sort of video for chemistry and physics available on those revision hubs. So when you finish this video and when you're ready to explore some more, I'd recommend that you go ahead. So let's start with some of the basics. If you are sitting triple biology paper 1, it is 1 hour and 45 minutes and your paper is worth 100 marks, which is 50% of your GCSE. Whereas if you are doing combined science, so you'll be doing the combined science trilogy biology paper, your exam will be slightly shorter, so 1 hour 15 minutes, and is worth 70 marks. And this is about 16.7% of your GCSE. Both exams cover multiple choice questions, some short answered, some structured, and then some more open response questions as well. I'm sure throughout your time doing your GCSEs you've come across plenty of these, but we'll go through a few now related to some of the topics in paper 1 to give you that extra little boost. So let's go through the topics covered in paper 1. So there are 4 topics or 4 modules in paper 1, and that is B1 cell biology, B2 organisation, B3 infection and response, and B4 bioenergetics. Make sure you revise all 4 of these thoroughly, and here this is where the specification is your best friend, and I used the specification as much as I possibly could during my own exams all those years ago, and it is something which will be your guiding hand throughout your exam revision season. Another thing not to forget are those required practicals that you've done throughout your GCSE course. And these are the ones that you would have carried out at various points throughout the last 2 years or so. And for paper 1, you may be asked about microscopy. If you're a triple student, you might be asked about the microbiology practical. And then you could also all be asked about the osmosis, food tests, enzymes, and finally the photosynthesis practicals. There could be other practicals which are similar to the practicals that you learnt about, but these are the main ones which you should really have an understanding of the hypothesis of, the variables, so your independent, dependent and control variables, your equipment and their purposes. So these will be the main ones, but you also can't forget things such as goggles, heat-proof mats, beakers, things like that. And then you've also got to have an understanding of the method. I wouldn't say you need to go back to your practical sheets and learn everything word for word, but having the understanding of what the method is absolutely crucial. You also need to know how you're collecting your data, so this might be linked to the method as well, but you also need to know what the tables look like and what you are measuring and how you're measuring it. You've also need to make sure you have just a vague understanding of the data visualization, so what a graph should be expected to look like for that particular practical based on your variables and the hypothesis that you've created. And finally, your evaluation, so your errors, limitations, improvements for extra validity, as well as your reliability, and finally a conclusion as well. And yes, I appreciate there are quite a few things you need to know for each practical there, but if you can get those in your revision as well as the content from the main specification, it could make a massive difference to just those extra few marks and that confidence going into your paper 1. So you may have not seen these before, or you may have seen them quite a long time ago, but the exam is built on fundamental biological principles, and you're expected to, through the work you've done over the last 2 years and into your revision, to understand how some of these things come about. So for example, you need to have an appreciation that life processes depend on molecules whose structure is related to their function, The fundamental units of living organisms are cells, which may be a part of a highly adapted structure, which includes tissues, organs, and organ systems. So highly linked to B2 organisation here, which enable living processes to be performed effectively. And then also that life on Earth is dependent on photosynthesis, so B4 here, in which green plants and algae trap light from the sun to fix carbon dioxide and combine with hydrogen to make organic compounds and oxygen, which then leads on to our final key idea for paper 1, which is that organic compounds are used as fuels in cellular respiration, so B4 again, to allow other chemical reactions necessary for life. So these are some core ideas which run through the scientific method, and you might see running through your exams as well. So these are potentially vital to those AO3 marks where you can kind of see the bigger picture. But I wouldn't worry about these too much. I just wanted to make you aware of them. However, throughout your GCSE course, you would have developed a lot of appreciation for these understandings, which are quite ingrained in you now. So this is something which just to be aware of in the background, but not to worry too much about. You've also got some extra key ideas as well, but these ones are slightly different because they run through all of the sciences, so chemistry and physics as well. So these will be the same. This is again stuff that you've done throughout your GCSE, which are kind of demonstrating that you have the ability to do now. So firstly, the use of conceptual models and theories to make sense of observed diversity of natural phenomena, the assumption that every effect has one or more cause, that change is driven by differences between objects and the systems in which they interact, that many such interactions occur over a distance without direct contact, so you're maybe thinking of diffusion or osmosis, but that's more linked to chemistry and physics, I would say, that the scientific processes through the cycle of hypothesis, practical experimentation, observation and through development, and the ability to review these is what really drives our scientific understanding forward. And finally, that quantitative, so numbers and other similar things, that quantitative analysis is a central element of both many theories and scientific methods for inquiry. And again, similar to the biology specific key ideas, these have run through your entire GCSE and is something that you can present to the examiners now, essentially. So how are you assessed? There are 3 assessment objectives, and these form the basis of each exam question that you will face. So AO1 is demonstrating your knowledge and understanding of scientific ideas, techniques and procedures. And this is about 40% of your GCSE. So 40% of the marks for this paper will be based on demonstrating that knowledge and understanding. 40% is also applied to applying knowledge and understanding of those ideas, that inquisitiveness of those techniques and procedures as well. So we'll go into the difference between these in a moment, but this is more relating to your ability to explain your knowledge. And then finally, AO3, which is the ability to analyse information and ideas, to interpret and evaluate, make judgments and draw conclusions, and also to develop and improve experimental procedures as well. So you will probably find that a lot of your required practical based questions, which can often typically make up maybe like about 15% to 25% of your paper, will be based on AO3 rather than AO2 or AO1. And this is about 20% of your GCSE. So if you have any more than that, it's more likely to be AO2, because AO2 might also include drawing graphs or making some calculations based on the results from a required practical. But most of the required practical will be based on AO3, because you're really analysing a method or applying ways to improve a method that you've been provided with. So at the start of every question that you do, I'd really recommend you look at the command word. Look at the command word, because the command word gives you a clue to which assessment objective the question is asking you to demonstrate, whether you're demonstrating understanding, demonstrating your ability to apply your understanding, or analysing some information. So let's look at AO1 first. AO1 will often ask you to identify give or state, or just have those common command words that you've seen throughout your education of how, when, where, which, define, describe, name. All of those would likely be linked to AO1 unless it's clearly linked to another type of question. And then you've also got your AO2s, which typically will be explain, can also be describe. Usually describe will be to a situation, to a specific context, let's say. So AO1 describe might be recalling a process about enzymes, and then describe AO2 might be applying it to a very specific enzyme which you've learnt about earlier on in the question. Calculations will often be AO2s, completing as well. So you might have a table which has different examples in them, and you've got to apply your knowledge to essentially answer the question correctly about a specific context. And then compare as well. Compare can often be AO2, because you're comparing two different things about one particular aspect of them. So that's really applying knowledge of a different process or a different example. And then you've also got your AO3s, which will be, again, analysing. If you see analysing, it would almost definitely be an AO3 question. Determine, so determine might be you've been given some information and then you've got to determine or predict. They can often be used interchangeably, an outcome based on the information that you've been provided with. Justify, so it might be more of an opinion based, or you've been given a set of information potentially about a method, and you might need to be saying whether you think a method is valid or not. You might have to justify your answer. Evaluate, so evaluating a method, evaluating a case study or a solution used in a real life case study. Suggest, so you're using information that you've been provided with to come up with your own explanation for something, or suggesting a solution to a problem that you've been given. And then plans as well, so it might be to plan a method rather than evaluating a method. That would also come under AO3. And as I've said on the previous slide, that AO1, AO2 marks will make up approximately 37 to 42% of your paper 1, and AO3 17 to 23%. So it can vary slightly, but it won't fluctuate too much. So now we're going to go through each assessment objective type in turn, give you some example questions and some model answers for them, and then give you a bit of time to practice them yourself as well. So AO1 questions assess your ability to recall facts, structures, functions of particular organelles, for example, or other aspects of a process, definitions and key concepts. And so it's really your ability to demonstrate your knowledge of that topic. So here, knowledge is power, and that ability to have revised the content and be confident about each of your topics going into the exam is what's really key to getting those AO1 marks. So an AO1 mark might be a multiple choice question. Not all multiple choice questions are AO1, but most of them will be. One word, short, 1 mark answers. They could also be alongside or embedded in AO2 and AO3 questions, and we'll show you some examples of this. And if it's within a more complex question, usually it means that you need to demonstrate your knowledge first before then applying it to an example or just going into more detail. And so usually for answering it, you don't need to be writing that much. You really don't. So often it will just be one word or that short phrase, a very concise description or definition. And honestly, the mark schemes are never that long. They just need you to give that exact key point. You need to be writing more potentially for your AO2 or AO3 marks, but for AO1 marks, really, you don't need to be spending that much time on them, and you don't have enough time in your exam to spend lots of time on them. So this is focusing on that factual accuracy and clarity, so you're really trying to keep it short and concise. So let's go through some examples. So let's start with some examples of some 1 mark answers. So in question 1, state the function of a mitochondria in a cell. So for this question, you need to recall the function of mitochondria and make sure you use the correct terminology. So this example answer here, being the site of aerobic respiration, you want aerobic and respiration as the keywords in your answer. And for this question 2, give one factor that affects the rate of diffusion. For this question, you need to identify one correct factor that influences how fast diffusion occurs and make sure you're very specific. So you've got a couple of different answers you could have here. You could have temperature, concentration, gradient, surface area, or diffusion distance. And as you can see, these are just a couple of words or one word, one single phrase. You don't need to go into any more detail than that because you were just given one factor. You're not explaining it. You can also have AO1 questions which have more than one mark allotted to them. So in this example here, it has been divided into two parts because you are completing a table, but it could just as easily be one full question. So name the type of cell in figure 1, and we have figure 1 here. And then you just need to describe one feature of the cell that helps it to carry out its function. Identify the cell here, which we can see would be a nerve cell because we've got some clues such as the myelin sheath here, we've got axons and dendrites and a cell body as well. You don't need to be that specific. You don't need to say it is a relay neuron, a sensory neuron, or motor neuron, etc. They just want you to say it's a nerve cell. You don't need to be any more specific. And describing one feature of the cell, there's multiple ones you can have, and it's quite useful to look at the figure and identify one of those in there, which would definitely be a feature because you can see it right there. So the myelin there, or it has insulation, branches, or it's just like it's very long. That's a key feature of this cell that not every cell has, so it's a very identifiable characteristic of a nerve cell and will get you the mark. And now let's go through an example where AO1 makes part of the question but is not the full question. So the roots of a gorse plant, which is we have here, have bacteria that turn nitrogen gas into nitrate ions. And now you need to explain why nitrate ions are needed by the gorse plant. So here what you need to do is demonstrate your knowledge of the role of nitrate ions or nitrogen in biological molecules. So you might need to remember that nitrate ions are in amino acids or proteins, so that's a key function in biological molecules. And the reason we need to think about biological molecules is because we're talking about a specific type of ion or molecule, so instantly we need to start thinking about biological molecules because that's the level at which we're working with. And then apply that use of biological molecules to a gorse plant. So why do plants in general need amino acids? Well, they need to build more tissue, so it's needed for growth. So that's what I've put here. So nitrate ions are needed to make amino acids, mark 1, which are needed for growth, mark 2. So now it's your turn. So pause this video here and then go and have a go at some of our AO1 mark questions supplied for you on the course revision hub page. So go back to the revision hub now, and underneath this video you will see AO1 questions, AO2 questions, AO3 questions and extended questions. And I think the best course of practice here will be to practice those AO1 questions now whilst all of that AO1 information is in your brain, and then come back to this to then go through AO2. So pause this video here and I will see you shortly. Well, I hope you enjoyed those AO1 questions. Now we're going to move on to some AO2 questions. So AO2 is your ability to apply your knowledge and understanding to a context provided in the question. Here we're just going to go through some specific isolated questions, but often this context will be provided at the start of a question, and then you might have 8 parts to a question, and you just need to make sure that you remember that all the information you've been provided in a certain whole question could be relevant to this sub-question. And you've also need to show your ability to use relevant examples to show how you understand that concepts work in practice. And so often that will be your extra level descriptions or your explanations. So again, you might get multiple choice questions or even some one word short 1 mark answers. And often will be a part of an AO1 point alongside this AO2 point. And if it's part of a more complex question, so linking to AO3, you may need to define or describe something first before going into that extra depth. And this is really your opportunity. it's always important in an exam, I think, to think about everything as being an opportunity to show off. And this is your opportunity to show off your scientific knowledge and really think about what you've learned and how it applies to the situation that you've been given. And so to answer these kind of questions, I think the first thing you need to do is consider the amount of points you need to make. So is it a 1 mark, 2 mark, 3 mark or 4 mark, or even 5 mark or 6 mark question? And is it telling you that it's related to an investigation or a case study already? Therefore, you need to be using the wording of the questions or the information that you've been provided with, which will help you on your way. And then you also need to consider whether you need to demonstrate your knowledge first before applying to the case study, because that might give a clue that you need to get some AO1 points in there before going into your application of knowledge. So let's go through some examples of some AO2 mark questions worth just the 1 mark. So question 1, give one way the structure of a leaf helps it to carry out photosynthesis efficiently. So efficiently would mean as quickly as possible or using the least amount of energy necessary. And the reason we know this is an AO2 and not an AO1 is that it's given us an identifier. So we're given one way, but we also briefly need to describe it. So identify that one structural feature that you would like to talk about and link it to the function in photosynthesis. So there are a couple of different ones you could have here. So I've got a few written down, such as a large surface area to absorb more sunlight, a thin shape so gases can diffuse easily, or the presence of chloroplasts or chlorophyll to absorb light. And question 2 we have here is a multiple choice question. So a cell of a species, each contains 12 chromosomes. How many chromosomes will each new cell contain after mitosis? So here you are applying your knowledge of mitosis to identify the correct number of chromosomes at the end of the process. So here the answer is 12 because mitosis produces identical cells with the same number of chromosomes. And question 3, a student investigates osmosis using potato cylinders. So this is required practical 3 osmosis. What is the dependent variable in this experiment? So here you are applying your experience from the osmosis practical to identify what is being measured in the context of the investigation. And here it will be the change in mass of the potato cylinder. So wherever we end up changing in the experiment, the mass of the potato cylinder is what we are going to be measuring. And so here are some examples of some questions with multiple AO2 marks. So this is a calculation question about magnification. So a student uses a microscope to observe an onion cell. They calculate the magnification as at 100 and measure the image length as being 5 millimeters. Calculate the actual size of the cell in micrometers. So here we need to use our magnification formula and convert the units to make the calculation. So I started by converting the millimeters into micrometers. So that's 5,000. And then I've used the magnification equation, which has 5,000 divided by 100. So image size divided by the magnification used to get the actual size, which is 50 micrometers. And for example, question 2, a person has a blocked coronary artery and explain how this affects the heart and leads to symptoms of a heart attack. And this is worth 3 marks. So we need to make sure we have 3 points here and we need to link the biological process to the real life effect, so coronary heart disease. So in this example question here, the student has written that a blocked coronary artery reduces blood flow to the heart muscles. That's 1 mark. So the muscle cells don't get enough oxygen. So that's explaining the impact of that reduced blood flow for another mark, and begin to die, which causes chest pain or a heart attack. So that's the symptoms that we are linking that effect on the heart to. So that is a good 3-mark answer for this question. And finally, we have some AO2 questions as part of a larger question. So in this first question, we have been given the equation for BMI, and we are told that body mass index is one measure of obesity, and it is calculated using this equation. So essentially what we need to do is use this equation, which you won't have had to have learned, but apply it to person A in this question and identify from the table which category they fit into. So this one, we can simply use the numbers 88 and 1.75 and move them into this equation here to come up with a BMI, and you'll have a good clue whether you're on the right track with it, because if you suddenly get 287.3 and you look at that, we can be fairly confident that we're not in the correct answer realm here, so you might need to recalculate. But here we have calculated a BMI of 28.73, which tells us, based on the table here, that our person A is in the overweight category. And then question 2, a patient has narrow arteries due to fatty deposits, which again is linked to coronary heart disease. Doctors suggest inserting a stent to improve the blood flow, and so we need to explain how this stent helps and why this reduces the risk of a heart attack. So here we firstly need to apply our understanding of coronary heart disease to disease treatments, and then evaluate that impact on the intervention on health. So we know, based on our knowledge from our specification, that the stent keeps the artery open, which allows the blood to flow more freely. And we've got a clue from that because we've already been told that the patient has narrowed arteries, which is obviously a negative. So I guess the first thing you should be thinking is that if they're narrowed and that's the bad thing that's happening, we need to find a way to basically reverse that problem. And so our second mark will come from explaining how this can prevent a heart attack. And so this will be thinking, right, so we've opened up the artery. What does that mean? It means that the heart cells can get more oxygen, which, as we've seen in the question before, and it might well be linked to the question that we saw in the last slide, prevents heart damage or a heart attack. Okay, now it's time again to pause the video and use some of those AO2 principles that we've learnt to have a go at the AO2 questions that we've given to you on the Revision Hub. So have a go now and then come back to this video in a minute. So finally, let's look at AO3 questions. And so AO3 questions assess your ability to analyse a situation and break it down and explain what's really happening, and to evaluate the effectiveness of something, or this could be potentially a method. And you need to justify decisions that you make about required practical or anything else with reasoning, and potentially draw some conclusions based on evidence that you've been given. So maybe that's a table of results or a graph. And so the question might look like analysing some movement or data, giving your opinion and backing this up with evidence. And it could also be part of a question alongside an AO1 or AO2 point as well. And on these ones, the main thing to remember is to back yourself up and remember that you're answering the question that you've been given. So consider the amount of points you need to make first. Again, how many marks is it worth? Does it tell you to relate your answer to a figure or practical? So often this will be bolded, as in using figure 1. That means you would actually need to use data or information from that figure. And then also consider whether you need to demonstrate knowledge first and then apply to the context provided again. So let's quickly go through some questions. So question 1, a student carries out a food test for starch. Links back to our food test practical. The iodine solution stays orange-brown. What does this tell you? So here you need to use your understanding of the food test practical to evaluate the outcome of the practical that you've been given. And based on our practical, we should know that the iodine solution staying brown is related to starch, and that it tells us that starch is not present. Otherwise, it would have become a blue-black colour. Question 2. A student is planning an investigation into the effect of light intensity on the rate of photosynthesis in pondweed. They decide they need to use an LED light source because it does not get hot. So explain why it is important that the pondweed remains at a constant temperature. So what do you need to do here? Firstly, you need to show that the temperature is a factor that affects the outcome of this particular practical. And secondly, you need to explain that this is because enzymes control photosynthesis and that enzymes are sensitive to temperature. So this is really drawing on 2 points from our specification here. This is obviously related to photosynthesis and the required practical, but it is also linked to enzymes, because we should know that photosynthesis relies on the action of enzymes, and we can think back to B2 and realise that temperature affects the activity of enzymes. So in this answer here, we would need to say simply that temperature affects the rate of its photosynthesis, hence the LED light support. because the reaction is controlled by enzymes. So that's showing that we can put the information from different topics all together into a single question. Now let's look at some other AO3 question examples. So here, figure 1 shows that the activity of pepsin and trypsin at different pH levels, and you need to describe the trend in the graph of the enzyme pepsin. So here we basically need to look at the data and describe what we see. So we can see this bell curve here, but you don't want to just describe it as a bell curve, that's not enough. We need to here, as I've said earlier, that we need to describe the figure that we've been prompted to using actual data. So pepsin activity increases from pH 0.2, which is roughly what we've got here, to pH 2. And then enzyme activity decreases from pH 2, which is right here, down to about 3.5. So on these ones here, when it's describing, you want to explain the whole graph, so get information from all parts of the graph and really guide the examiner through what they should be seeing. And so, for example, question 2, this is a slightly longer one, let's read it all out. A study of patients with narrowed coronary arteries were given different treatment plans. One group exercised and was given medicine, so this is without stent group, and one group had a stent inserted and were given medicine with stent. In the without stent group, 374 out of the 1,674 patients died of a heart attack within 5 years. In the with stent group, 382 out of the 1,701 patients died of a heart attack within 5 years. So here you need to evaluate whether these results suggest that stent surgery should be recommended. So here you need to analyse the information provided. So the first step I would do, and this is what the question needs you to do, is quickly calculate what percentage difference is there between the without stent group and with stent group. Because it's all well and good having these figures here, but the percentage gives us a direct comparison. So here, if you look into it, you'd find that 21% of the without stent group died within 5 years, whereas 22.4% of the with stent group died within those given years. They're very similar. So the conclusion that I've come to, since there is no large difference in the outcome, stent surgery is not worth doing, because we know that there's not a big difference in the outcomes, and we also know that stent surgery is quite invasive because it involves going into the arteries and opening them up from being a bit more narrow, and doing this when there's other treatments available which come with similar outcomes. So that's the medicine. And potentially for many people the stent surgery might not be worth doing, but this is again just an opinion, but you need to make sure you justify your opinion to get those marks. So now it's your turn. So pause this video here and have a go at the AO3 questions that we've provided for you. And then once you're done with those, come back here for a final section on some extended question practice. So extended answers require you to incorporate different assessment objectives. So it could be a mixture of AO1, 2 or 3, or just a couple of them. And your ability to demonstrate your knowledge, apply it to real life context, practicals or case studies provided, and answer the question to come up with a conclusion based on some evidence. And so these will usually be 6 marks, and essentially it would take one topic or a couple of smaller topics put together and just see how well you react to just giving a little bit more oomph to your answer. So for these questions, I would usually say you need to start by underlining your key information from the question. What topics is it asking you to look into? And in some cases, it can be useful to provide a brief introduction or potentially a conclusion to summarise the points you've gone through. You'll also need to make sure you're explaining, not just stating all the points that you've given, and use the command words again as clues for directing your question. Keep it well organised and easy to follow, because we're writing a bit more here than we have done on other questions, so we need to make sure that the examiner knows what we're trying to say, and only include relevant information. So similar to that last point, we want to make sure that the examiner can look through our answer and quickly tick off all of the elements that they're looking for. And finally, there might be cases where you can use visual elements, but only use them when they make it really effective. So only use them in some very isolated circumstances. So I think, as I've said previously, you'll maybe want to briefly plan your answer into paragraphs if you have time to, just to make sure you've included everything that's written in the question. If you even write it on the paper itself, it might help to get extra marks. But if you don't want that answered, if you don't want that marked rather, make sure you cross it out so that the examiners know not to look at that. If you accidentally forget to cross it out and you've just written some very disorganised notes, it might cause confusion and you wouldn't want that. So let's go through an example of an extended question here. So drug companies regularly develop new drugs to treat infectious diseases. Explain why testing must be done before a drug can be used to treat people. And this is worth 6 marks. So a level 3 mark for this question has been described as being clear and logical with no significant gaps in the process and links processes to the reasons for the clinical trials. Whereas a level 2 would be a partial answer containing some errors. So for that level 3, you need to make sure you've got no errors. There might also be inaccuracies in the reasons for the process and some ineffective linking between those reasons for the process and actually linking it to a clinical trial. And for a level 1, you might have 1 or 2 relevant points, but they're not potentially linked to reasons, or it's all just a little bit disorganised as well. So for each of these type of questions, examiners are given some indicative content, which they can use to then determine which level the student's answers go into. So we'd look through these ones here. So we've got the idea that clinical trials are conducted on a new drug to assess toxicity, dosage and efficacy. You've also got that you need to perform clinical trials on healthy volunteers and infected patients at very low doses to monitor the safety and potential side effects. And only then can trials be carried out to determine the optimal dosage and test for efficiency. And then you implement a double-blind trial with the use of a placebo, which is the placebo does not contain a new drug. Randomly assign infected patients to different groups, which ensures that no one knows who receives a placebo or a new drug. Subject the data to peer review, which helps prevent any false claims. So these are the indicative content which examiners are given to basically say this is the kind of stuff that answers should be including, and then the examiner's responsibility is to determine what level the answer should fit into based on this and how well each of these elements of the indicative content are linked together. So here we have another example, and for this one we're going to go through the different levels and also give you some example answers as well. So compare aerobic and anaerobic respiration in muscle cells. And here you need to include an explanation as to why aerobic respiration is more efficient than anaerobic respiration as well. So a level 3 answer gives some clear and logical relevant points which are correctly linked, and so some sequential reasoning. And it also addresses the question with no irrelevant inclusions or significant omissions and uses the appropriate scientific terminology as well. And then this is in contrast to your level 1, which might include some relevant points, but they're not linked, and the question is addressed, but reasoning is limited and has some significant omissions or gaps, and it's very limited use of scientific terminology. So again, that's what the examiners have to base their marks off of, but it's fairly, what would you say, up to interpretation. So here I'm going to give you some examples of what a level 1 to a level 3 answer might look like, and briefly explain why that question has got that mark. So here's a level 1 answer. Aerobic respiration uses oxygen and anaerobic doesn't. They both release energy. Anaerobic respiration makes you tired. So this would be a level 1 answer because it does provide a basic recall of one difference and some vague similarities, so that they both release energy, the difference being that aerobic uses oxygen and anaerobic doesn't. However, it doesn't go into an explanation why aerobic is more efficient, and that reasoning lacks some clarity or depth. So let's move on to this level 2 answer. Aerobic respiration uses oxygen and produces carbon dioxide and water. Anaerobic doesn't use oxygen and produces lactic acid. Aerobic respiration releases more energy than anaerobic because it breaks down glucose more. So this is slightly more developed than that level 1 answer and correctly identifies the products of respiration. So, and there is also some use of scientific language such as glucose and lactic acid, and it does begin to explain the efficiency of aerobic respiration, that it releases more energy. And there is some structure and some brief comparison, but it really lacks that full depth or detail, which we will see in our level 3 answer coming up. But this is a good answer. Level 3 to 4 is good, and it does show you that you don't need to be writing an awful lot on these questions in order to get a significant number of the marks. And you will see the level 3, it doesn't include all of that much more written content. So let's have a look at our level 3 answer here. So anaerobic respiration uses oxygen and breaks down glucose fully into carbon dioxide and water. So here we've already gone through our whole aerobic respiration process, or briefly summarised it. Anaerobic respiration does not use oxygen and only partially breaks down glucose, producing lactic acid instead. So in this first sentence, these first two sentences, we've compared aerobic and anaerobic respiration by discussing oxygen first, and then the amount it breaks down glucose and what it produces. Both processes, so again, comparing again, release energy. But aerobic respiration releases much more energy per glucose molecule, making it more efficient. So we've used the word of the question here to explain why aerobic respiration is more efficient. We've been told it's more efficient, but saying it releases more energy per glucose gives us that explanation. Anaerobic respiration also causes an oxygen debt, as lactic acid builds up and must be broken down later, while anaerobic respiration does not. Again, this is another comparison point. It's a bit less relevant than our explanation of respiration, but it is still relevant nonetheless because it is part of the process of respiration. And again, this is why aerobic respiration is more suitable for long duration activities, whereas anaerobic respiration is used during short bursts of intense activity when oxygen is limited. So finally, another comparison relating it to muscle cells, because muscle cells are often used during exercise. So it's linking all of our whole question that we've been given together to give an explanation for why it's relevant to muscle cells. So why is this level 3? It clearly explains processes, products, and energy yields. It uses accurate comparisons with the correct terminology and also includes oxygen debt and links to the context. It shows clear, logical reasoning in a structured way and touches on that real world relevance. So now it's your turn. We have 3 extended answers for you to try out. They are available on the Revision Hub page next to our AO1, AO2 and AO3 questions. You can have a go at 1, 2 or all of them now and see how you get on. But that is everything from us today. I really hope you found this video useful. In a few weeks' time, we'll be releasing paper 2 for biology. But in the meantime, head over to our GCSE chemistry and physics pages to have a look at a similar video, but applied to some chemistry and physics paper 1 type questions. So enjoy the rest of your day. Good luck with your revision, and I will see you very soon.